It's such an honor to be here. I can't thank you enough. I can't thank Antony Gormley enough. I really feel it's a privilege. And I should just say that there are people in this room who I know, but I just want to let you know that I can't see you. So that you're not offended by me not going hello and greeting you. So I'm pleased to see you, in quotes. So let me just start with some introductory remarks, which is to say, there is no artist, or rather I would wager that there is no artist who takes sculpture so far into the furthest and most intimate reaches of bodies, space, and time. We can begin with a child confined to his room, curled up in the dark, out of which he finds the first trace or hint of freedom, or the homeless of India, and you have a slide there of a very early sculpture from 1974 called Sleeping Place, enveloping their own body as they lie abject on the city streets. And then we could track from there to the innards of the world, to elementary planetary life, molten iron as a primary elemental soup, or the self-organizing principles of vibrating sound, or endlessly moldable clay and brick submitted to fire. To put it most simply, your reach, expansiveness is truly astounding. It can be exhilarating and frightening. It has an uncanny ability to evoke how we are rooted and infinitely mobile in one and the same piece of work. And as has just been quoted, Teresa Kittler in her exhibition essay says that you have described Body Politic as your toughest and most political exhibition to date. And my reading would be, your aim is to make sculpture the space where we confront the ills and injustices of the world, and at the same time, the space of emancipation. An imaginative and material riposte to the worst of what we live, see, and are. Never more pertinent than now, when we are witnessing the ruin of the planet and the assault on the peoples of Ukraine and the war against Palestine. There really is, so this is of course true of all significant artists, nobody who does anything remotely like what you do. And it leaves me feeling that I don't know, and for someone interested in psychoanalysis, this is a big compliment what I'm about to say. It leaves me feeling that I don't know who or where I am. I have three main questions which I hope we can circulate round during the time we have this evening. And if my wording of these questions sounds weirdly familiar to you, Antony, it's because I have taken a jumble of quotations from your writing, which it has been such a pleasure to read and reread over these last months. And it seems to me that your attempt to understand is a bit like a set of echoes or a jigsaw, or my attempt to understand, you attempting to understand, is like a bit piecemeal and a jigsaw where the puzzle doesn't fit, but something is evoked nonetheless. At least that's what I'm hoping will happen shortly. So I have three questions. One is about the political, one is about the body and its gender, and one is about the psyche or the unconscious, where we go in the dark. What's left, you might be thinking. So we will, of course, refer to the current exhibition, but I've also deliberately gone back in your work and tried to track how these themes follow through so much of what you've been conceptualizing and writing and, above all, sculpting over the years. Okay, so first of all, to take the politics or the political, we live in a time where the need for refuge is in dynamic tension with the need to roam, or where massive inequality, our awareness of it, is at odds, or should be, with self-interest. Things cannot continue on this path. We live in a world where bodies are cramped, crouched, abject, incarcerated. And I know this is close to your heart, as I had the privilege of working with you at the Precursor Prisoners Trust, where we together looked through the incredible input of prisoner art to the Cursor Foundation, and then you exhibited and chose the winning entry. We live in a time of war. Is the refuge a prison? Is the sanctuary a cell? And sculpture can also be, as you've said several times, an opportunity to bring to life or give solidity and weight to the excluded, the marginalized, and the oppressed. And I've just been to the Rodin exhibition, which was mentioned just a few moments ago in Paris, where your work journeys through and around the most disturbing moments of his work. And in one room, statues cast from your body are hanging from the ceiling. And in another room, right next door, they're in this incredible, entangled, jumble, collapsed medley of just about recognizable individual limbs and body parts on the floor. So we are in a space of lynching. We are at the gates of hell. On the other hand, I see another notion of the political in your work, which is when, in your early book on sculpture, you allude to Joseph Beuys, particularly his work, Plight, which he said was deeply affected by the experience of Auschwitz-Birkenau. You allude to Giacometti, who, as many of you will know, was completely traumatized and changed his whole artistic practice after 1945. And then, most unexpectedly of all, you allude to Arthur Scargill. And you allude to Arthur Scargill because he went into one of the rooms constructed by Joseph Beuys, and he said he could not believe the ability of that work to reproduce the stillness and silence and sense of danger to be down a mine shaft. Now, there's another meaning, all right? There's the homeless in India on the floor. There's the politics of trauma and historical memory. But there's also, there's also another version of the political which has started to emerge, although it was always there, which I will call the idea of planetary harm. And in Body Politic, you're working with clay from a valley bottom in Gloucestershire, deposited 140 to 350,000 million years ago. You work with cast iron, which you describe as an elemental primal soup. You refuse the idea of the artist as sovereign subject and the artwork as discrete object because you want to break the barrier between them to enmesh the human body in the planetary biosphere. So to summarize the main political voices which I identify in your work, and I'm sure there are many others: politics as lynching, imprisonment, inequality, and war. Politics as struggle. Politics as memory. Politics as our place on the planet in the face of climate catastrophe. So my first question is, can you expand on the politics of what you make?
Golly, thank you. You can see that Jacqueline is a wonderful thinker, but she does her research. And I'm so grateful to you for, in a way, explaining my project to myself. This is the toughest show that I've made, and I think it's a show in which there was nowhere to hide. There are no edges that you can sort of creep up on. And I think it comes, I think reading and listening to Jacqueline thinking about reading Freud in the time of a pandemic has really helped me think about why now this show. And I think the truth is that the pandemic was this wonderful hiatus that suited artists particularly, that you weren't eagerly going out to do another show. You were hoeing your own row, and in a way in your place of working and dwelling, in a way that we had been separated from in the multiple layers of distraction that the early 21st century offers. And I think this was a time in which a lot of examination was done, as well as perhaps the dark side of the pandemic, which was domestic violence caused by people who perhaps had not examined their own relationships sufficiently to survive being so close for so long in such lockdown conditions. But anyway, the truth is that I feel, I was just reading The Guardian before coming here, 30 million tons an hour of the western Greenland ice shelf are melting. The deep Meridian Atlantic pump that keeps the Gulf Stream where it is weakening. What is this all from? It's from in a way, the results of our enlightened progress. The urgency of this time and the gift of the pandemic as a possibility of a place and time of thought seems to me to have been squandered. You know, we're being led by donkeys into greater and greater disaster. And, you know, there are wonderful phrases that Jacqueline comes up with in her thoughts about Freud in the time of the pandemic. How tyranny is the silent companion of catastrophe. And I think that's where we are. So I'm not an intellectual. I make things that are an attempt to materialize a question. The central question is, where are we? And we're in two places. We are in a body. This is our primary vessel, our primary habitat. But we're also in a world that is organized through ideology and through, in a way, industrial, engineered processes. And I guess that's at the root of the show, and maybe also part of why I needed to make it the way it was and why I needed to make it now.
Okay, let me pick up on some of the things you've just said. We are in our bodies. When I teach psychoanalysis at the university, in a way we start from that assumption that we're in our bodies, and we have to problematize it, because as Winnicott said, who was one of the psychoanalysts you're most interested in, there's no such thing as a baby. There's only ever a mother and a baby, which is to say that the body of the baby and the body of the mother are undifferentiated to begin with. And it is the task of the mother to disillusion the baby, i.e. to accept the severance of these two entities which are completely intermeshed at the beginning. And in a way, nobody ever recovers from that loss of connectivity, which is then enjoined on us and reproduced over and over again by affiliations of gender and nation and race and so on, and malign forms of collectivity which split us all off from each other. So when you say we are in a body, okay, and you're not always speaking to the gates of hell or to the sleepless man on the streets of India, what is it? Can you elaborate a bit more on we are in our bodies? Can you?
Well, I now feel that I'm under trial as to why I should burden the world with all of these silent lumps of perfectly lovely planetary substance. And I guess, my reply is that our species has always found it necessary to make models of itself in order to understand itself. And I would say that yes, we are born, all of us, and this is a magical and extraordinary thing, all of us come out of other bodies. We are all, as it were, the fruit of bodies coming together and then gestating and then emerging out of another body. But, and particularly now, where each of us, we've all got these external brains that we can, learn about an ever wider and hopefully deeper world. But I think that art can help us understand that separation. And I think the separation is really necessary, that we are all artists of our own selves. And that may be a job that perhaps psychoanalysis is a kind of worker in. But I think of art. I think of art as a primary tool. It's a primary tool of collective survival, and certainly was for our forgotten ancestors. But it's also a tool of reflexivity, and I think that. Sorry, but I'm very likely to get on soapboxes one sort or another. But anyway, in the danger of our time is that art can, in its commodification and institutionalization, the blockbuster shows, the kind of wow factor or whatever, become part of a process of distraction. And I want to, and in a way, the model of people on long-distance flights not recognizing that they're 39,000 feet above the surface of the planet, and looking in a way narcissistically, in a collective way, at these stories, these movies of our race kind of doing things together, rather than feeling absolutely terrified about the fact that we're in a very dangerous, jeopardizing position with thousands of litres of aviation fuel all around us. This is, for me, a kind of parable of our collective cultural kind of distraction. So, sorry, I'm now making a manifesto, but I just think that
we need manifesto.
The replacement of the model of art as a reproduction of kind of the way things are. I mean, I've been watching, Slow Dogs, so I'm as guilty as anybody else of watching telly or enjoying movies. But I think we have to replace that ability to reproduce our own kind of, the drama of every day, with the potential of reflexivity, and I hope that I guess that's the excuse that I have. So this is a good image, and I think you recognise what I was trying to do here.
I love this. I just think it leads into my second question, by the way, but I want to just say I love this because, first of all, only when I saw The Gates of Hell at Rodin did I get the full measure of the fact that as you approach it from one side, it looks as if the figures are headless, right? And you have to go round to see the faces buried in the bodies from Rodin's sculpture. And it's as if your figure is the ghostly premonition of the hubris of a certain kind of statutory self-affirmation. Okay, so before I get on to my second question, I want to come back to something you just said. I have been so impressed and struck by the place of earth, substance, clay, molten iron, sand vibrating. I've been so conscious of your immersion in the biosphere, not as a message, but as something you're actually doing in your work. And if I put it in conjunction with the other meanings of the political that I raised a few moments ago, it's as if you've taken the idea of planetary harm, or you've taken the idea of the planetary, which has become so central to the work of somebody like Achille Mbembe, wonderful, wonderful African writer. And he talks about necropolitics, and he talks about the planetary. And necropolitics is the destructiveness of the modern era, which you were touching on. And planetary politics is an expansive politics that will take back everything we're in the process of destroying. It's as if you have had premonitions about this, Antony, because this preoccupation goes back. But I assume, and I read that thing in The Guardian this morning about the melting ice cap, I assume it's become more and more important to you.
Yeah,
and I would love to hear a bit more about the way that has become a major preoccupation. What it's done to and for you, I suppose, would be my question.
I'm just naturally a very anxious person. I think I grew up in a time of, where nuclear disaster was the most likely self-afflicted fundamental harm. The era of protect and survive. Do you remember that? And maybe I'm susceptible just to this in a way that the surface of things and the way that things are done are not to be trusted. The kind of business as usual world that we are, in a way, continually invited to agree with or work with. And I mean, I think that the likelihood of nuclear Armageddon was just right through the 80s, probably starting, I mean, I would say Man Asleep, which was made at the time of the great Ethiopian famines, was the beginning of, I think, a transition between feeling that actually the balance between us and other creatures was just totally out of kilter. And I think, certainly by the millennium, I think the climate emergency had taken over as my main fear for our future. I mean, just interestingly, this is by the by in a way, that this, you could say that all of my solid works are industrially made fossils that are going to talk to whatever life forms follow us in the evolution of life on this planet. But here we have, in a way, a Christian idea about the fall, about our, in a way, original sin, with this judgment of Adam at the top, and then these constantly falling figures of Rodin's. And I've put domain, which is an abstract body to be seen against the infinity of space, you could say cosmic space, as a kind of reminder of, the fact that none of us are here for very long, that sapiens sapiens hasn't been here for very long. From the latest evidence, 300,000 years, the most recent sapiens skeleton or part skeleton was found in Morocco only 2 years ago and has pushed it back. We thought it was at about 170 and now it seems to have doubled. But in terms of if we think of the early stromatolites, 3.5 billion years in terms of the evolution of the biosphere. So there's something that you say about Freud recognizing that maybe the jeopardy that is increasing exponentially along with those 30 million tons of melting ice per hour is our separation from our fellow creatures. And it's very paradoxical to me that that's happening at a time where we are finding new species, we are understanding the grace of Richard Attenborough, but also all of the research that is going on. Whether it's Sheldrake telling us about, the fungi, the fifth great kingdom that we know almost nothing about, maybe 10% of the total species, and yet that has been the force that has made life possible at all. So at the very moment when we are seeing mass extinction, we're actually more informed about the whole history of the evolution of life in a way that we could never have conceived even in the time of Darwin. Sorry, I may be going off on one.
No, I don't think you are. I think you're saying that there's a new, you're saying something which I think is been so true in the pandemic, that it was a catastrophe, but it also, in the way that Camus describes in the play, brought to the surface of the streets with the dying rats and then the people who died afterwards, bringing to the surface the injustices, the harms, the pollution, the abscesses of the social order and making them visible for everybody to see. And I'm sure many people felt at the beginning of the pandemic, when suddenly the welfare state was a good thing, for example, and everybody was talking about care, and everybody was talking about distribution, of fairness. There was a kind of fleeting moment when people thought maybe the pandemic was going to make the world a more just place.
Yeah, I thought, that was my hope. It was just wonderful. It was like there was a new possibility that actually people could be aware of their neighbours, be aware of the tree down the road that you hadn't really looked at, maybe the park that you hadn't really played in, all the people just immediately around that somehow you'd been so eager to get out there, you hadn't acknowledged, and yeah, I mean, this, in a way, this balance between the vicarious knowledge that we can have of everywhere should be in perfect balance with the intimacy that we have with here, with now, with indwelling. And anyway, but I mean, all of those, I don't want to be depressing, but I just sort of feel like we haven't used the lesson that the pandemic gave us.
But the word indwelling would be a very good account of what you do to the body in relationship to itself and the earth. You both affirm it and undo it. And to that extent, one could see your work as an ethical response. I'm just moving my pages across because I'm heading for question 2. As an ethical response to what you've so graphically just described. Now, can we go back to the previous image? Oh, was that the previous image? The one before of the skeleton? Yes, I want to go back to that because I am struck by the extent to which the body, the sculptures made of casts of your own body, have moved from something like self-presence to, and here it is, a form barely distinguishable as human, that, not in this one, but nonetheless
the next one's pretty good for the illustration of this.
Okay, oh yeah, that
there
one.
It is, yeah.
That one,
yeah.
okay.
Almost not there.
Okay, thank you. You've moved bodies that are almost not there. And just to talk specifically about this amazing new exhibition, and I really would encourage people to get there, as was already said, in the next 10 days, because you will be missing something if you don't. And it seems to me that it's brought this tension between the affirmation of the body and its complete, almost disappearance to a kind of breaking point where we move from retreat, the body as or in a bunker, to resting place with no less than 244 body forms made out of fired clay blocks. And I spent a long time in my second visit in that room because in the first visit you had insisted to me there was joy in the form, whereas I saw incarceration and being grounded. So I looked round again and sure enough there were bodies that looked as if they were splayed to the sun or reaching out to eternity or stretching as far as the mind and the body can go. So I had to concede that point. But then my favorite room, which is this one. This is Weaveworks with its latticed, rusted cast iron bars through which light and air can pass. And viewers, as you say, are made aware of their movement, and because each of these bodies are touching the wall, but in such a precarious way, it makes you aware, and them aware, and viewers aware of the connection of these bodies to architectural space. And it was worth going to the Rodin exhibition for many reasons, but especially for seeing that filament standing on the upper wall, because it's as if to say that they were issuing a warning to Rodin himself. Those bodies are issuing a warning. Now, in body politic for me, Weaveworks, which is this one, was the counter or alternative to stand. Can we see stand now? Yeah, it was a counter to that, its monumentality of this, which is made of a stack of caught steel beams rising to nearly 5 meters tall. Its monumentality made me shudder. Now, crucially, none of these bodies correct me if I'm wrong, are gendered. None of them are remotely identifiable as your own. So now here comes the question. In one published conversation, you say you've been accused of being narcissistic for the central place of your own body in so much of your work. So let me make a confession, which is at the beginning, I wasn't totally sure myself.
Good.
And I must admit, there were points where I just thought, I think I've had enough of this now.
You're not alone.
I don't want to see this body anymore. Okay. But as I watch these male, robust figures standing, almost striding, none of them are striding, in fact, across the horizon, how can you not experience these bodies as an affirmation of masculinity? How can sculpting a body that is recognizable resist its powers of figuration? And you say in your film, in the commentary on Stand, you are reassessing the language of the statue. I am challenging the right of the statue to stand and to stand for anything. Now, having said all of that, there are, and I'm hoping some of you will say really, sculptures of women's bodies in your work. Now, the troubling figure, if we could go now to Lorraine Williams. Yes, okay. Now this really, I don't know what to think about this. I'm really hoping we can have a conversation about it. She is Lorraine Williams, a Wagatha woman from Australia. Her body was reduced by 66% by digital scanning, then placed in a chemical landscape, Lake Ballard, in Western Australia. There's also another unmistakable woman.
Let's see the context and then the bigger context.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, okay, very important. Okay, so what kind of space is she subsisting in? I think it's incredible, that image, but it disturbs me very deeply.
Let's hear why.
Okay, it disturbs me very deeply for reasons that go into feminist commentary on the representation of the body from the 70s. And I'm thinking of a famous, wonderful article by Laura Mulvey, the feminist film critic, not her essay on scopophilia, visual pleasure and narrative cinemas, not that one, but one called Feminism, Fiction and the Avant-Garde. And in this essay, she talks about the trap of representing the body of the woman on screen, because then she gets caught up in the regimes of scopophilia, fetishism, voyeurism, and then on the other hand, excluding her from the space of representation, in which case you've just repeated her oppression. So it's as if there is no safe way to represent the body of the woman. She came up with Peter Wallen in her film, for example, Riddles of the Sphinx, or Amy Johnson, with what she said had to be an admixture of avant-garde artistic practice to make this work. You had to see the making and the unmaking of the body of the woman. So this could be described for me as the making and the unmaking of the body of the woman. But nonetheless, it seems to be fraught with peril, which is not a judgment, it's just really a gut response. And I'd love to know what you say to those other people who've said they had enough of the body, and what you say to her.
I guess, yeah, there are a lot of things to unpack or talk about in that. I mean, I think just to put Lorraine, who was, Wangatha, there were two tribes that I had to, that I got very friendly with in order to make this work. It's called Inside Australia. There are 51 sculptures, of which 26 are indigenous people and 25 are white folk, the colonizers, one might say, or anyway, the newly arrived. And I think of the insider being to the body what memory is to consciousness. This is a core. It's a form of abstraction that is very different from Giacometti's gestural, you could say, kind of attempt to, in a way, talk about the way that space eats at mass. His project is about distance. I wanted to release bodies from the accidents of appearance and allow attitude to be as it were, painfully revealed. And I mean, it was maybe clumsy, but I also wanted to use, as it were, independent means. There are other slides which I think are what you were referring to, and we'll look at them in a minute, of domain field, where I asked 300, there it is, yeah, 300 people from the northeast if they would allow me to mould them in plaster. But to go back to Lorraine, in this case, we got a body scanner.
This was in the image.
Yeah. Let's go. We got a body scanner from Los Angeles. We flew it into Menzies, which is this like derelict mining town, about 2.5 hours north of Kalgoorlie. And so here we have a 3D scan of Lorraine that has then been laterally divided into stacked cross sections and then shrunk by 66.66 recurring percent. And the idea really was to, I suppose, have a dialogue between, you could say, the individuality of the subjects and this collective, you could say, concentration, finding this core, literally the core, like a carrot has a core or whatever, the core of the body. And then exposing that interior attitude to space at large. And I called it a chemical landscape because it's really interesting. I mean, the saline crisis in Western Australia is increasing as water tables are diminishing, and saline salts are rising to the surface, making it totally impossible to grow anything. And I guess, for me, you could say this was a reverse anthropological project. This was about asking again about the relationship of a body to a place, of a living being to a landscape. And the interesting thing is that it was the Wangas and Wangathas that took this as their work, and the white folk that just said, oh, it's another one of those government projects to try to make amends. There's a lot of that in Australia, and it's an impossible project. But I mean, that gives the context. It was really very important to me. I mean, in answer to your question, when the reason I went to using my own existence, as it were, as tool, material, and subject, was that I didn't want to talk to or for anybody else. Once I realized that actually there was a way of remaking art as a collective creative enterprise, not enterprise, but project, I wanted to involve everybody. So for this, we had, Jason was maybe 5 and was molded. So we had equanimity in terms of kind of age, but also in terms of race, but also in terms of gender. And it was, I'm still very proud of this project. It's hard to get to, and not everybody gets there. But it's another one of those. Boyce said, "Show your wound." I have tried to, in a way, use places on the surface of the planet that indicate, in a way, imbalance. You could say that the Angel of the North stands on a tumulus that is the results of 300 years of mining and the destruction of all of the pithead equipment and baths that were necessary for the St Anne colliery to do its work. Another place of, in a way, planetary, but also humanly made disturbance. And to try to make something that perhaps indicates the wound, but also starts maybe a process through discussion and the questioning of whose. We were lucky enough to be given the dreaming for this. It's called Lake Ballard, which had been a sacred site for the Wangatha, and we're given permission by the. I did this project with Hugh Brodie. Is he here? No. A wonderful anthropologist who's spent significant amounts of time in the far north with the Inuit and Inuktitut nation. But anyway, sorry, I don't know whether that excuses me.
Whoa. Okay, you said some amazing things about liberating the body from its...
The accidents of its appearance.
Accidents of its appearance. And you have given an answer to the question in terms of not wanting to speak or to represent on behalf of, for, in the place of anybody else. So it's a kind of self-accusation and a kind of engagement with what is most damaging, sculpting the wound, and only being willing to do it in relationship to your own person. I will have to think about it, but it seems to me like a fairly strong answer. Would it be fair to say, Antony, that in a sense what has happened is that more affirmative, like, you know, you on the top of the National Theatre on the film festival, you know, across the river and so on, that primary affirmation has been increasingly, and I want to turn this into a word, vulnerabilized by the encroaching atmosphere which phallic man claims to be towering over and in control of. It's been increasingly sort of made vulnerable by the encroachment of everything that makes that a lie, which is, you know, this was so true of the pandemic. Subjects are frail, mortal, precarious, vulnerable, endangered, and most of daily life is a way of putting that into abeyance or denial, which is why so many people were so devastated by the psychological atmosphere produced by the pandemic. So I'm just wondering, sorry, I'm twittering on a bit here.
No,
I'm just
good.
wondering if the whole project, and that's too simple, so take whole out of there, part of the project has been to show the male body disintegrating or collapsing or curling under the weight of what it claimed to be able to master, which takes us back to the Freud thing where he says we thought we could master the planet, we thought we could subdue nature or actually destroy the species. And in one of the most remarkable remarks I came across of his, he says, whoever's up there, whoever's organizing all this, will have to try the experiment on a different species. So he was condemning as if there was no future. But, and this takes me to my final question, which I don't think we've got time to discuss, which is the space of the dark, I think for you, is the space in which this can be negotiated in all its abject painfulness. Bunkers, look, bodies in bunkers, bodies as bunkers. And that's what you're doing. Whereas for me, and this was going to be the final question, the dark for me is a psychoanalytically informed space of teeming phantasmagoria and unwanted drives. And one of my favorite quotes from Shakespeare is, I could be, sorry, I've got it here. I could be bound.
A nutshell.
I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself king, let's say queen, of infinite spaces where I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself king of infinite spaces were it not that I have bad dreams. So I think I've understood more from this discussion what the dark is for you, because it's a space in which this can be chemically organized and understood and splayed and put under investigation. It brings man down with it, or a certain phallic version of man, crumbles with it, and it sends us into the dark. Is
I
that,
think we've gone a bit too quick, but
have I gone too
no,
quickly?
no, but it sounds like I'm being forgiven a bit, but no, I guess, I think, Freud's unconscious and the realm of dreams and drives that often include fear and the kind of the invitation to violence. I think that's one kind of darkness. I think my darkness is the darkness that you actually find in the Tao Te Ching, but I found in practicing Anapana and Vipassana meditation. And it is actually this extraordinary thing that we can all think of ourselves as individuals, as subjects, as in a way living within an intimate subjective world, but all we need to do is close our eyes and we are immediately in something that is, as it were, the absolute opposite of that. Not universal, but, I guess all of those words, the incommensurable, the ever-extensive. I mean, the fact that when you close your eyes, you are somewhere, but it is physically experienceable. It has no object, it has no dimension, it has no edge. So there's a paradox here that on the one hand, in discovering, as it were, maybe the motivations, the drives, we have to go somewhere called unconscious. And I underwent analysis for over 10 years, and it was a really important and necessary part of me actually resolving some of the very fundamental repetitions of my life. But I think in the end, the direct experience of, you could say, what in the 18th century one might have called the sublime, as direct, immediate experience. Sitting, I did 10-day courses while I was in India for 2 years, and sitting for 14 or 16 hours a day, doing absolutely nothing, being with being. This was a revelation to me. Up to that point, everything that I had been taught to value came from the ability to reproduce historic events, historically inscribed thoughts of others. And here was, as it were, this understanding about human being, or being actually, that was what was really remarkable about the end of every group meditation session. We would sing a Pali chant, Beve tu Beve Mangalam, which just means, may all beings be happy. That like reconnection with all creatures, with all living processes around us. Anyway, I think that for me that was a real, it was an unbelievably important first step, and I came back and I made Sleeping Place. But interesting, I'm looking at this slide now, and I'm thinking about the mouth when Vicken, who is here, where is Vicken? Vicken is here, but anyway.
She's in the front row.
Hello, Vicken. Vicken was, my second mother, as it were, because she would bind me in clay and, in plaster and scrim, and then let me out. But I had to, she probably shouldn't have, but anyway, she did. But that breathing hole, that connection between, as it were, my life, my breath, my air, my pneuma, and the world, that is there. And then I think of all of those ventilators and those terrible moments of COVID, all those people gasping for breath. But then I think this is more Freudian. Then I think about what my attitude was to my home, 4 Neville Drive, Hampstead Garden suburb. I was supposed to think of it as my home, and I never did. It was a prison. It was absolutely necessary to escape. These objects are totally paradoxical. For me, yes, this is saying, yes, we live first in a body, but then we live in a built world. The whole of this show is an attempt to use exactly the same industrial processes that form our habitat. We're the only creature that makes a habitat that is simply the relationship of vertical and horizontal surfaces. But use those techniques, those industrial techniques that we use to make our nest, to talk about our condition. And that materialization of a condition, these are empty buildings, the smallest building that could be made for a body, and then based on, again, on my dimensions, but they could be used. They're terrible things on one level, and on another level, they are also this attempt to materialize the fact that actually, if you still the body, the mind can achieve its maximum expansion, which is something that I learned from Goenka. And you know, that experience in Sonada at Kalu Rinpoche's Gompa, of seeing people go into meditation cells where they might spend as much as 3 years, 3 months and 3 days, a single hole out of which they would expel their bodily waste and through which they would receive necessary sustenance in order to really understand the potential of the mind. And I think that's a very different attitude in a sense to the darkness of the body. I just did write something down because I think it's when I was at Cambridge, you know, we were just lucky to have that first wave of translations of such important texts, whether it was, you know, the Tibetan Book of the Dead or the Secret of the Golden Flower or whatever. But in the very first verses of the Tao Te Ching, which is about really the void, about emptiness, that we somehow think of as lack, as the thing that is the fundamental lack. The truth is that mystery and manifestation come from the same source. This source is called darkness. Darkness within darkness, the source of all understanding. I mean, it's very, in our very busy worlds, it's maybe very difficult to think about like that. But I see that return to the darkness of the body as a touching base with where all potential comes from, and it isn't for me. It isn't a place of repressed violence or kind of fear. It's a place of embrace and, in a way, the loss of I think, all of the anxieties that are attached to the ego. Shall we leave it at that? But thank you all very much for listening.